Hello, my name is Father Lawrence Jagfeld. I am a Franciscan friar of the Sacred Heart Province, headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri, and I am also the administrator of CUSA, an apostolate of persons with chronic illness and/or disability. On this third Sunday of Advent, we once again run into that familiar Advent figure, John the Baptist. The crowds asked John the Baptist, "What should we do?" He said to them in reply, "Whoever has 2 cloaks should share with the person who has none, and whoever has food should do likewise." Even tax collectors came to be baptized, and they said to him, "Teacher, what should we do?" He answered them, "Stop collecting more than what is prescribed." Soldiers also asked him, "And what is it that we should do?" He told them, "Do not practice extortion, do not falsely accuse anyone, and be satisfied with your wages." Now the people were filled with expectation, and all were asking in their hearts whether John might be the Christ. John answered them all, saying, "I am baptizing you with water, but one mightier than I is coming. I am not worthy to loosen the thongs of his sandals. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. His winnowing fan is in his hand to clear his threshing floor and to gather the wheat into his barn, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire." Exhorting them in many other ways, he preached good news to the people. This gospel really presents us with Luke's perspective in full force. John the Baptist is preaching to the crowds, to tax collectors, to soldiers, to anyone who will come and listen to him. He's preaching to everyone without exception. In the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, we hear John the Baptist more often than not preaching to the Pharisees, to the Jews. But Luke presents us with a little bit of a different picture. In each instance, whether he's talking to the common people, whether he's talking to the tax collectors or toll collectors, or whether he's talking to the soldiers, he simply tells them that they are to bring righteousness or right relationship into their day-to-day life. With the common ordinary people, he tells them, if you have 2 cloaks, give one away. Again, for those of us in this country, in Western society, the notion of having only 2 coats is somewhat foreign to us. We live in an abundance of goods. We live in an abundance of many commodities. These people lived a subsistence way of life. If you had 2 of something, that usually meant that somebody was going without. If you had too much food, that usually meant that somebody else didn't have enough. If you had too much clothing, that meant that some people were probably going naked. And consequently, John simply tells them, share what you have with everyone so that everyone can live comfortably. To the toll collectors, the tax collectors, he simply tells them, do what is yours to do. Don't take more than what is your due. Now we have to understand that these men purchased their jobs from the chief tax collector. They purchased their toll collecting booth, much the same way that franchises purchase their restaurants or their stores from the main company. And once it is theirs, they can set their own prices and set their own guidelines. The same is true of these tax collectors. Once they had purchased their job, their franchise, if you will, they could collect whatever they deemed fit. John is telling them, don't gouge people, don't extort more than what is your due. The soldiers come and ask him what they should do, and John again turns to a path of righteousness. Don't do things that will further your career and hurt others. Don't extort, don't cheat, don't be unjust. Be fair in your job of prosecuting criminals and protecting people. Once again, Luke is preaching to the masses. Luke is preaching to everyone, not simply to one group. John the Baptist, however, is also portrayed as someone who has certain expectations of what to expect in Jesus. And like so many of the people of that time, John's expectations are not exactly met in Jesus. John tells us that he is not worthy to stoop and undo the thong of the Messiah's sandal. A little later on, we learn that Jesus stooped down himself to wash the feet of his disciples. Just the opposite picture of what Luke is presenting us here with. Although the picture of Jesus washing the feet of his disciples comes to us in the Gospel of John, it really shows us how John's expectations were not exactly met in Jesus. John also expects that Jesus will gather the wheat into his barns and burn the chaff, referring to those who do good and those who do evil. When Jesus appears on the scene, however, Jesus actually sits down to eat with sinners, welcomes those who are, in John's words, the chaff. A little later on in the Gospel, John will send his disciples to Jesus and say, "Are you really the one who is to come, or should we look for another?" Some scholars point to this and say that John was simply trying to send his disciples to be followers of Jesus. But I think that if we really look at John's perspective at the beginning of the Gospel, we can see that he perhaps was having doubts about whether Jesus really was the one that he had been preparing the people to visit, to see in the Messiah. As we listen to the Gospel then, we can imagine what John would say to us. What are we to do? We are to live in right relationship with our God, in right relationship with our neighbor. For more information about CUSA, please visit our website at www.cuson.org.